Good evening, everybody. President Trump making a return to the campaign trail today, holding a campaign event this evening in New Hampshire. The president's event in Londonderry, his first major in-person rally since Tulsa, Oklahoma back in June. And President Trump is sure to be fired up after he formally accepted the Republican Party's nomination last night. President Trump speaking before nearly 2,000 people, the White House providing a magnificent backdrop to the climax of a powerful Republican convention made all the more complex by the China virus pandemic, heightened security concerns in the nation's capital as well. And over the course of 70 minutes, President Trump went through his unprecedented and historic accomplishments of his historic first term in office. President Trump reminded voters as well that there is much, much more to be done, more battles for him to fight and to win for the American people.
Together we have ended the rule of the failed political class, and they are desperate to get their power back by any means necessary. You've seen that. They are angry at me because instead of putting them first, I very simply said, America first. So tonight I say to all Americans, this is the most important election in the history of our country. There has never been such a difference between two parties or two individuals in ideology, philosophy, or vision than there is right now. Our opponents believe that America is a depraved nation. We want our sons and daughters to know the truth. America is the greatest and most exceptional nation in the history of the world.
The president also lit into his opponent, China Joe Biden. The president mentioned Biden by name, in fact, some 40 times. Law and order featured prominently throughout the final evening of the Republican National Convention, and President Trump himself made it clear Americans can choose 4 more years of his law and order policies and enforcement, or Joe Biden, who will side with rioters and Marxists.
Your vote will decide whether we protect law-abiding Americans or whether we give free rein to violent anarchists and agitators and criminals who threaten our citizens. And this election will decide whether we will defend the American way of life or whether we will allow a radical movement to completely dismantle and destroy it. If Joe Biden doesn't have the strength to stand up to wild-eyed Marxists like Bernie Sanders and his fellow radicals, then how is he ever going to stand up for you? He's not. Make no mistake, if you give power to Joe Biden, the radical left will defund police departments all across America. They will pass federal legislation to reduce law enforcement nationwide. They will make every city look like Democrat-run Portland, Oregon. No one will be safe in Biden's America. My administration will always stand with the men and women of law enforcement.
The final evening of the convention, filled with emotion and elegance. The widow of retired St. Louis Police Captain David Dorn choked up while she talked about her husband's death at the hand of looters. She made this argument against the radical left's rampant violence.
As I slept, looters were ransacking the shop. They shot and killed David in cold blood, and then live streamed his execution and his last moments on Earth. David's grandson was watching the video on Facebook in real time, not realizing he was watching his own grandfather dying on the sidewalk. He was murdered by people who didn't know and just didn't care. He would have done anything to help them. Violence and destruction are not legitimate forms of protest.
The parents of humanitarian worker Kayla Mueller argued her daughter might still be alive had President Trump been in office at the time. Kayla was beaten and killed by ISIS terrorists in 2015 as the Obama-Biden administration failed to bring her home. And Alice Johnson, she threw her support behind President Trump last night and his work for criminal justice reform. President Trump commuted her life sentence after she served more than 20 years for a first-time drug offense. In the White House today, President Trump surprised Johnson with his full presidential pardon. And what was the radical left's reaction to such a night of great drama and poignant, touching speeches? Well, in some places, more mob violence. Left-wing fanatics targeting supporters of President Trump as they left the White House grounds last night, as they left for the evening. Georgia State Representative, that left-wing national media doing its best again to defend the left-wing mob. Politico wrote this, quote, protesters confront Rand Paul outside White House after RNC. Confront. Senator Paul's wife, Kelly Paul, tweeted this in response, no, Politico, we were not confronted by protesters. We were circled by a hateful mob shouting vile expletives, preventing us from moving. The scene after last night's convention.
Go to the Hill today. Get up and please get up in the face of some Congress people.
And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome.
This is a movement, I'm telling you. They're not going to stop.
Not one Democrat among them all has condemned the attacks last night against their fellow Americans or an attack against a U.S. senator. A record-setting day on Wall Street to close out the week. The Nasdaq gained 70 points, its 40th record of the year. The S&P up 23 points, posting its 20th record of the year. The Dow up 162 points, erasing all of the losses of this year. All of the markets now above at their highest point. Volume on the big board today, again, 3.9 billion shares traded for the week. The Dow up more than 2.5%. The S&P and Nasdaq both up more than 3%. Crude oil finishing at $43 a barrel. A reminder to listen to my reports 3 times a day, coast to coast, on the Salem Radio Network. Up next here, please get to your pre-order. Get your copies at my new merchandise store, LouDobbsShop.com. Send a message to the radical left and embrace independents and Democrats as well. You can get 15% off your order at Lou Dobbs by taking the MAGA premium. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
At the Democrat National Convention, Joe Biden and his party repeatedly assailed America as a land of racial, economic, and social injustice. So tonight I ask you a simple question. How can the Democrat Party ask to lead our country when it spends so much time tearing down our country? In the left's backward view, they do not see America as the most free, just, and exceptional nation on earth. Instead, they see a wicked nation that must be punished for its sins.
President Trump last night said the party of hate cannot win in November. Breaking news now, a new study finds Republicans twice as likely to hide their voting intentions to pollsters than Democrats. Twice as likely. The study finds 11.7% of Republicans, 10.5% of independents would hide their true opinions on their preferred presidential candidate. Only 5.4% of Democrats would do the same. Also breaking tonight, the radical Dems in Virginia apparently believe assaulting a police officer is now a misdemeanor. The state's Victor Davis Hanson, senior fellow in military history at the Hoover Institution, professor emeritus of classics at California State University, best-selling author, National Review contributor, great American, and it is great to have you with us, Victor. Let's turn to your impression of the contrast between two conventions, that of the Democrats and the Republicans.
Well, I think let's start off with the mood, Lou. I think the Republicans came in there thinking they were closing the lead and that the trajectory has changed, and the May and June news cycle was not the September news cycle. And so they were upbeat, not just because they are naturally about America, but they felt that they were going to strengthen what is a pretty good trajectory. The Democrats came in there very worried, and they kept saying, vote, 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 we got to get out to vote. And then during the Republican convention, we heard from Hillary that Biden should not concede under any circumstances, almost assuming he'd lose. And then Nancy Pelosi said there should be no debates. And then Don Lemon at CNN said the polls are, not good for us. We got to come out and condemn the riots. So they must have been getting data. And when you mention polls that are somewhat skewered by the Republicans' sort of reluctance to tell the pollster what they really feel, there's two types of polls that are immune to that. And one are the bettors in Vegas. And about 85% of the recent bets went for Trump, who's almost closed to dead even. And the other is internal polls. Nobody pays money to be lied to in confidence. And I think that a lot of the Democratic worry was that their internal polls are not showing a good trajectory. And it's kind of important because one of the subtexts of the Republican convention was to get Joe Biden out of the basement. And that run out the clock strategy, I don't think is viable when the polls are almost equal or they're getting close to that. So I think there was a great worry on the part of the Democrats, almost a frantic anger, and that amplified their innate idea that America was founded in sin and it was flawed at its origins, and the Republicans' contrasting view that, we don't demand to be perfect to be good. So it was very different, and I think it's going to be very different. I see these conventions as kind of recalibrating the entire campaign from a virtual candidate of Biden to a virtual debate to into something very different. It's going to be wide open now, and I think Biden can no longer hide.
Yeah, it seems that it's inescapable. He has to find some way to be at least somewhat animated, show some level of energy. It is highly risky for him, given his many confused moments when he has been public. You can understand his strategy, which is to basically hide. But as you suggest, that may no longer be an option. Kamala Harris now not taking questions from the media, and the media not demanding she do so. The media not demanding that Biden emerge from his cocoon and actually engage with the public. This is madness. There's no precedent for anything we are witnessing in this political year.
No, it isn't. But I think, as I said, on another occasion, he's sort of a prisoner of his own paradox, because he can't debate for the reasons that you detailed, but if he doesn't debate, he's sort of reduced to Clint Eastwood's empty chair when Clint Eastwood spoke at the 2012 Republican convention. They'll have a chair up there and Trump will be talking to him, and it won't look good. And if he has a non-scripted press conference and he has a town hall meeting or he has a tarmac rally, it's not going to go well. But if he doesn't, it's not going to go well either, because this strategy of playing out the clock was based on an 8 to 10 point lead, and I don't think anybody believes either the polls are that accurate or that these internal polls reflect that lead. And so I think he's going to be pushed out, but if he's pushed out, he feels that he has no confidence to wage a campaign. So now they're turning to surrogates, and Kamala Harris, unfortunately, there was a reason why she didn't do well in the Democratic primary, because she's off-putting, she's shrill, and she's sort of, race. She can't finish a sentence without saying something about race. And when she talked about the rioting as, mostly peaceful and lawful, that wasn't true. and people knew it wasn't true because they watched local television or Fox News or YouTube. So I think they're going to have some problems they're going to amplify. And they've been running, Lou, against the virus and against Trump's tweets and against the lockdown and against the recession and against the George Floyd that Trump caused that. But that cycle is changing. Trump is a much more disciplined, careful candidate than he was 6 weeks ago. And the virus is going down in daily case numbers in most of the country. The lockdown is now get 50 million kids back to school, which is popular.
Right.
And people don't see much connection from looting a Gucci store on the Chicago $1 Million Mile and George Floyd, or trying to burn up policemen as they're barricaded in a barracks in Portland. So that news cycle is no longer a tailwind for the Democrats, and I think they're going to have to change. And yet they think that if we have to change and Biden has to go out there, it can't be good.
Victor, we're going to be back with more from Victor Davis Hanson, and on this other side, we're going to take up is the left trying to create a race war in this country? Just what are they trying to do? We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Our opponents say that redemption for you can only come from giving power to them. This is a tired anthem spoken by every repressive movement throughout history. But in this country, we don't look to career politicians for salvation. In America, we don't turn to government to restore our souls. We put our faith in Almighty God.
President Trump last night on the radical Dems' reliance on big government, their almost daily insistence upon dependency on big government. We're back talking with Victor Davis Hanson. Victor, I want to ask you, a young man who impressed me greatly, Daniel Cameron, the Attorney General of Kentucky, said to the Democrats, "You cannot tell me how to vote because of the color of my skin." I thought that was an eloquent, succinct expression of independence, and you're hearing something like that mood across much of the country. How important is that to the year and to the direction this country is really headed?
Well, it's very important, Lou, to the year because the Democratic Party has written off the old Union lunch bucket vote, the white middle class. And it relies now on the very wealthy and their money and the very poor and often minorities. But it's so skewered, that dialectic, that it needs about 90% of the inner city vote, 95% in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh to balance out rural Pennsylvania, or Detroit, rural Michigan, or Milwaukee. And Barack Obama proved that they could do it, at least in 2 years. Hillary couldn't do it. But what Mr. Cameron is saying is, you've relied on us so much, and you may think that I'm not the majority yet of the African American community, but we can beat you without the majority. People like me can get 10, 15, 20% of African Americans to vote and repudiate you, and because you've written off so many other groups, you're going to lose. And that's what terrifies the Democrats this year, that they have to have just an extraordinary, vast majority of African Americans, and they'll say and do anything to get that. And usually that means calling everybody a racist who appeals to the African Americans as individuals rather than collective. But more importantly, I think, Lou, this Republican convention, you said it, and others have said it, there was not a Romney there, there were not a Bush there, the McCain family was not there. This is a workers' middle-class party, and the emphasis was on class, 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 and not identity politics and not race. And that's a far more inclusive, fluid concept. And it was very weird. Here were middle-class people, often with tragic stories, sometimes inspirational, but they weren't mad at America. They wanted to be lifted up, of all different races. The Democrats were basically wealthy Hollywood, Silicon Valley, Wall Street types, party apparatchiks, and they were all angry, even though America's been very good to them. And they want race, race, race. But boy, if the Republicans can reinvent themselves into a dynamic middle-class workers nationalist party, then that's a very inclusive idea that they've never tried before. And that's also, I think, explains why a lot of the never-Trumpers just despise Trump. Yeah. Because they just don't want anything to do with a assimilated, integrated, middle-class party of common people and workers.
And a man who actually does what he says he'll do, delivers on his promises, and I don't mean that in a rhetorical sense. I mean it in a very literal sense. This is a man who has, more than any president who preceded him, has done exactly what he said he will do. And one of the things he said he would do is be the president of all the people. I think you're exactly right, Victor. This is now a populist party, the party of Trump. And Ronna McDaniel said the same thing on this broadcast here last night, that this is the party of Trump. And that makes all the difference. My question to you as we wrap up. So much has been made of mail-in voting. So much of it has already taken place. How likely is it is rigged that it will have a definite influence on the outcome of this election?
Well, I think we have to be specific. We're worried about, I'm in a congressional district where my Congressman David Valadao won by over 6,000 votes on Election Day, and because of third-party vote harvesting, he lost by 600 to the Democratic candidate. So it's something we got to worry about. We know why they're pushing it, but it's really a question in these states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, North Carolina. Who's the governor? Who's in the legislature? Who controls it? And that, in that context, it's a little bit more favorable for the Republicans. We all know what California and New York are going to do, but it's not going to matter. But what we're worried about is Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania. What are they going to do? Because they're going to decide the election. That's where we've got to really hope that the Republicans put their resources to monitor it, because mail-in balloting, canceling the debates, the Joe Biden basement strategy, they're all efforts to avoid confronting the real issues of violence and this left-wing agenda. And they'll do anything, any means necessary to not talk about that, because it's a losing, as we saw in the primary, those are losing issues. Yeah. Of AOC and Bernie Sanders.
Okay. Indeed. Victor Davis Hanson, always good to have you with us. Thanks. Good to see you, Victor. We'd like to hear your thoughts about Victor Davis Hanson's point of view. Share your comments. Follow me on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Like me on Facebook and Instagram. Programming note, Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin will be our special guest this coming Monday. We hope you'll join us for that and much more. Up next, more shady nonsense from Senator Lindsey Graham. What is he up to? We'll talk about it with Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton. And pre-order my new book, The Trump Century, How Our President Changed the Course of History Forever, available now. Pre-order your copies at our new merchandise store, LouDobbsShop.com, as well as Amazon.com. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Who is hiring the radical professors, judges, and prosecutors? Who is trying to abolish immigration enforcement and establish speech codes designed to muzzle dissent? In every case, the attacks on American institutions are being waged by radical left. Always remember, they are coming after me because I am fighting for you. That's what's happening. And it's been going on from before I even got elected. And remember this, they spied on my campaign and they got caught. Let's see now what happens.
President Trump last night on the politically corrupt Department of Justice and FBI and, yes, federal judiciary and the origins of Obamagate. Well, breaking news tonight, Senator Lindsey Graham reportedly held a secret interview yesterday with Joe Pintka, a career FBI agent at the heart of Obamagate. Pintka, who used a fake defensive briefing to spy on the Trump campaign and who was with Peter Strzok when they set up General Michael Flynn, trying to frame him. And he interviewed Graham as well as senators, senators not on Graham's Judiciary Committee. One Senate aide telling the Federalist that under previous judiciary chairs, the practice was to invite all committee members to attend. Graham didn't even tell some of the Republicans on his committee. We contacted Graham's office for comment. We, not surprisingly, have yet to hear his response. Text messages reveal how former Senator John McCain associate David Kramer was feeding stories from Christopher Steele, the author of the fake dossier, to the left-wing media. Kramer's text to Steele read in part, quote, "The Flynn call story is picking up legs. I think it's time to get that other story out there." That's a reference to a column about Flynn's contact with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak. The messages also say, "Ignatius is the one I'll feed it to," referring to Washington Post columnist David Ignatius. And a win to tell you about tonight for the Trump campaign. An Iowa judge rejected 50,000 absentee ballots because they were pre-filled out with voter information. Earlier this month, the Trump campaign and Republican groups in the state filed lawsuits to invalidate those ballots, saying voters should fill out their own ballots to protect from fraud. Joining us tonight, Tom Fitton, the president of Judicial Watch. His new book is A Republic Under Assault, The Left's Ongoing Attack on American Freedom, available for pre-order now. Tom, good to have you with us. It turns out there is voter fraud in this country of it's seemingly all forms possible. Your reaction to the latest?
Well, in Iowa, the problem with mailing out ballots that are pre-filled or ballot applications that are pre-filled, that makes it easy for someone who isn't supposed to get them to follow up and get the darn absentee ballot in response, especially to someone who's living in a place where the ballot is mistakenly sent. We did an investigation of Iowa's numbers. We found there were problems. And, the problem here is you've got these ballot applications and ballots going to registration lists, which are dirty. If you're in the business of mailing... Well, they're
dirty, and they're also being used to pre-mail ballots out to voters without any assurance that it'll get to them or any assurance that there won't be greater fraud. I mean, I think everybody gets why it looks like it's a rigged deal and really a bad idea. But meanwhile, and I don't remember any of us getting to vote on it, the Democrats go straight ahead with precisely that, mail-in voting.
It's so irresponsible, it has to be malicious. And especially the politicians, because the politicians know, because they're in the business of contacting voters in their campaigns. They know the voter registration lists are notoriously unreliable. They spend all sorts of money trying to fix them themselves because they waste time contacting voters that aren't there. So they all know it's a joke, and yet they're still pushing out almost 100 million ballots and ballot applications, Lou. They know it's going to break the system. What you see on the streets, you're seeing it in the election system. It does. It really does.
It's got to be stopped. It's just that simple. Let's turn to Senator Graham, again, making news by doing something really very, very odd, not telling members of his own committee that he was talking with Pintka, the agent who accompanied Strzok, trying to frame General Michael Flynn in August of 2016. I mean, what is this senator thinking? Can you divine his innermost thoughts?
I can't. To me, it indicates they're being dragged kicking and screaming into doing any investigation. And you can give yourself some credit, Lou. Give Judicial Watch and others have been critical of the not only Senator Graham, but the Republican leadership in the Senate for failing to investigate this. This would never have been done, and it's only being done because of grassroots pressure and pressure that folks like you are bringing. on the Senate. It shows that there's a serious concern by the American people that there's been no sufficient accountability. And however problematic the way that Graham is doing it and half-baked, it would never have been done but for this pressure. I'm surprised they're asking any questions at all. It's a really kind of a victory that they're bringing this guy in at all at this late date. At this late date.
It's stunning. And a late development, the Attorney General responding to a court battle out west, the Ninth Circuit Court enjoining an injunction against the enforcement of law by the federal government in Portland, Oregon. I mean, it's come to that. And it is absolutely obscene that a federal court in Portland would not want federal law enforcement officers or any law enforcement officer to have at their disposal any tool with which to preserve law and order and civil order where there is so much violence. 91 straight nights of violence.
Well, it shows you the attack on the rule of law isn't just on the streets. It sometimes is in the courts. In my view, the president should invoke the Insurrection Act, use his other presidential powers under law to protect the citizens and guarantee them a Republican form of government in Portland, because they don't have it anymore. It's anarchy. Look, you saw what happened in Washington, D.C. last night. Guests to the President of the United States, I was there in my personal capacity. You wouldn't believe what was going on. You left the White House at risk for your personal safety because of the leftist mayor of D.C. not providing necessary security around the White House. Unbelievable.
Incredible.
A senator was almost killed, but for a police officer happening to be there to protect him by the communist mob.
You know, I would like to think the FBI is investigating this with great energy. My guess is, however, quite different than what I would hope. Tom Fitton, great to have you with us as always. Thanks so much. Tom Fitton, Judicial Watch. Up next, President Trump highlighting the importance of faith and mercy. Pastor Robert Jeffress with the president today, with us tonight. Right after this quick break, stay with us. Our next guest prayed with the president today in the Oval Office after President Trump pardoned Alice Johnson.
Father, we thank you for the remarkable story of Alice Johnson, a strong believer in the Lord Jesus Christ whose life was filled with heartache and injustice. And yet, instead of becoming bitter, she chose to trust in you. She cried out to you for years, asking relief from the hurt that she was feeling. We thank you that you chose to answer her prayers to you through a great president named Donald Trump, a great leader who, yes, believes in law and order. He believes in justice, but he also believes in mercy.
The man praying, Pastor Robert Jeffress from the First Baptist Church of Dallas, Fox Business contributor, amazing author, amazing American. Great to have you with us. Good to see you, Pastor.
Thank you
that was a special moment among many I know that you've shared with this president. But for Alice Johnson, who was absolutely poignant and just so elegant in her words last night, that was a wonderful, wonderful idea to give her a full pardon. Good to have you with us. What are you thinking about?
Lou, I have never seen or experienced anything like I did today in the Oval Office. This was completely the president's idea, really on the spur of the moment. He had already commuted her sentence, but he said, wouldn't it be wonderful? We were just talking, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could just give her a fresh beginning? And so he talked to his advisors, as he should, and they talked about the pluses and minuses, as they should, but he said, it's the right thing to do, and we're going to do it. And, you know, this just shows the side of the president that you'll never hear from the fake news media. You and I both know that when he needs to be tough, there's nobody tougher than Donald J. Trump. But when the situation calls for kindness, there's nobody any kinder or more gracious, and that's what makes him such an effective leader.
One of the most effective elements of what was, I think, a terrific convention for the Republicans was the number of times they showed every day working men and women supporting this president and telling their stories of their relationship with him, what he has done in policy that has made their lives so much better, or what he's done personally that has made their lives better. To see Alice Johnson endorse him as she did is going to be meaningful. It is also meaningful all that the president and the convention did in the name of pro-life in this country.
Yes.
Not anti-abortion, but pro-life. And they made, I think, just a powerful message throughout the week that will carry on through this campaign and beyond.
I do too, Lou. And look, in 2 weeks, you've seen two political parties paint two very different pictures of the kind of America they want. And if you want a country that is built on socialism, godlessness, lawlessness, then the Democrats are your party of choice. But last night we heard from our president, and really all week, a vision for a country that continues to be built upon faith and freedom and law and order. I believe that's what most Americans want, and I believe that's why President Trump will be reelected on November 3rd.
This president made a point in his comments last night in his speech, which I thought was a terrific speech. He said that you should not be looking to government; you should be looking to God. Those are powerful words coming from any president, but at particularly this moment, as this country is facing so many challenges, so many threats, and this president standing and fighting, to hear him say that is very special indeed. And again,
yes,
I think a very powerful message to all Americans.
And you never heard anything like that, even from Ronald Reagan or either of the Bushes. This president is unique in his embracing of faith.
Absolutely. Pastor Robert Jeffress, you're unique and a great American, as I said. Thanks for being with us. You can pre-order my new book, The Trump Century, How Our President Changed the Course of History. Available now. Pre-order your copies at our new merchandise store, LouDobbsShop.com. And for a 15%
com a mulher filé.